This is the BrainChip podcast. Hear from our thought leaders about neuromorphic computing, beneficial AI, and how BrainChip's Akita is pushing AI to the edge. This podcast is a place for investors, practitioners, and anyone interested in the future of AI.
Okay, everybody, good morning, good afternoon. I'm not sure what time zone all of you might be in. I'm going to do our second podcast, and I thank you for joining the podcast we're downloading. This is our second in what will be a series. I would like to remind everybody that these podcasts, they're not intended to be a company update. We'll continue to do our quarterly and year-end updates as we've done previously, but our goal here is really to shed light on the high-growth artificial intelligence, we call it AI market, and where we find the most attractive segments for BrainChip. The prior podcast was a little bit lengthy. Our goal was to provide context for new editors, analysts, and investors. Today, I'll keep this relatively short and set the stage, which I think you will all enjoy, set the stage for Peter Vandermeer, one of our founders, and Anil Mankar, another one of our founders, to join our next podcast and give you their perspectives. I think that will be really enjoyable and probably quite educational. So with all that being said, I think it's important that we recognize that all of our constituents, that's our employees, and there's about 40 of us now, editors, analysts, and investors understand our target markets and to some extent our go-to-market strategy or thinking. We focus on four primary areas. And I've tried to simplify this. I did this in our last podcast. Smart home, smart city, smart transportation, and smart healthcare. All of them are very large market opportunities. I will say that in upcoming podcasts, we intend to invite industry experts in order to provide a little bit greater context from independent sources with, frankly, varied views. All of these are large and growing markets, high growth markets, with many verticals within each segment. And I've said this before, it's not what to do. Everybody's chasing artificial intelligence. It's which to do. And I think we've been very successful in looking at all of these major markets and figuring out exactly where the edge opportunity exists. Our approach to ultra low power and edge learning supports the development of smart sensors. Smart sensors of many types. And this is where you essentially provide the analytics at the edge for what we call the five senses. We can do sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell. And, it's an enabling technology because sensors can't be smart if they have to go back to the cloud every time they have to be trained. So if a sensor sees a new input, it has to go back to the cloud and be retrained. We can do that at the edge. I think it's also important to recognize or expand upon the idea of what we call beneficial AI or beneficial artificial intelligence. How do we help humankind and build a company at the same time? I think you've all seen, or many have seen, that we've signed several, if not many, early access agreements, proof of concepts with major semiconductor manufacturers or device manufacturers. We recently announced our first material licensing agreement for our Akita intellectual property. And we're also well on our way to producing the Akita integrated circuit. I think everyone here, or most, have seen that we have handed off the files to Socionext. But I think, hearkening back to this first material licensing agreement, material is a big word. The early access agreements and proof of concepts, they could run between 50, 100, 200K. But when we talk about a material licensing agreement, I'm not going to name names here, but it's already out in the public domain. We're really on our way to a very high gross margin business in that respect. A licensing agreement for IP does not require any hardware from us to be delivered. It's our intellectual property that will be incorporated into, call it an SoC, system on chip, could be a microcontroller, it could be a variety of things that our potential customers are really interested in. We're also focused a great deal on medical applications that could provide non-intrusive early diagnosis of infectious disease, cancer. We're focused on improvements in transportation, safety in cars, safety on railroads, aerospace, and as I think all of you know, or most would know at this point, also space exploration, because we are working not solely with NASA, but with NASA partners. So this is why we say beneficial artificial intelligence. If we can improve the humankind, I keep trying to say mankind, but I have to say humankind to be correct here. If we can improve the safety, the early diagnosis of diseases, everything that I just mentioned, we really are on the forefront of, again, what we call beneficial intelligence, beneficial artificial intelligence. Just a little bit more specifically, smart home. I know it's kind of an overarching theme, but it includes appliances to home surveillance. We can seek all kinds of value here. We can also see the burden that all this smart home stuff is imposing on our home infrastructure. By moving the analytics to the edge rather than relying on the cloud and retraining every time something new comes up, we can improve the quality of service, free up bandwidth, and minimize cost, which all three are very important parts of the kind of smart home marketplace. Smart city is it's somewhat similar to smart home, but here we're focused and have engagements. I use the word engagements, meaning we're having dialogue. People are looking at technologies that suit their purposes, including surveillance, which is a very, very large part of the smart city marketplace. Clean air. I go back to 1984 when the U.S. government passed the Clean Air and Water Act. So clean air and clean water, but it's becoming an increasing challenge. But one where with smart sensor technology and AI at the edge, I think we can make a big impact. And honestly, improved agricultural technology, knowing what's growing, how it's growing, when it spoils, are all things that we're currently in dialogue with. Smart healthcare, again, just going through the four major markets. Diagnostics of all type. We've talked on our previous podcast about VOCs, or volatile organic compounds. The ability to, and not just sense, which will be our partners, they make the sensors, but then do the analytics locally, unintrusively, and come up with a result for infectious disease, cancers and pre-cancer diagnostics, medical imaging, pharmaceutical development. You could just go down the list. The smart healthcare market for us is, I believe, going to be a very significant one. Then we move to smart transportation. And if you get in the theme here, smart is the word. How do you move intelligence to the edge? We do that extremely well, ultra low power, and the only solution that we are aware of where you can actually learn at the edge. Again, new things show up. Even if there's a smart sensor, it has to go back to the cloud or it has to go back to a data center and be retrained. That's not the case with Akita. Akita is able to literally learn at the edge. So smart transportation, it covers so many areas. Railroads, airplane safety, Basically we're going to bump up against sensors that are providing vibration, temperature, acoustics, and of course we can't leave out, because it's been one of the areas that we've been I think the most successful in our engagements or dialogues is ADAS, or assisted driver systems and autonomous vehicles. So these are all four major markets that have high growth. In many cases, we will find that these are intellectual property sales, which not a bad way to go. Great gross margins in that regard. And of course, we've got Akita, which has now been transferred off to Socionext, and shortly will be in wafer fabrication for our production silicon. So, I don't want to take a whole lot of time here. It's a very short podcast. Our next will be early next month, and I will ask Peter. They're dying to get involved here, so it's not like I have to ask Peter and Anil. Anil will focus on a bit of our product development and what the use cases are that we currently see, and Peter will focus more intensely on what's next and we're at Akita 1.0. What does Akita 2.0 look like? What does Akita 3.0 look like? And along the line, as I mentioned previously, we will have some industry experts. I don't know if expert is the right word, but we'll have some folks from industry, whether they are editors, analysts, other CEOs, but we will have them join the podcast as well. So I'd like to thank you for listening again. This is much shorter than our prior podcast, our first, but I think the first really kind of set the stage, given the number of new investors, the number of new editors that were covering the company. But here it's really starting to move the communication to what are those markets? How fast can they move? Frankly, I was quite surprised that this large Japanese company they moved virtually overnight, which is somewhat unusual for a large Japanese semiconductor company. So with that, I'm going to sign off, and we will speak again another four weeks or so. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the BrainChip podcast. Please remember to rate and review on your favorite podcast platform.